Hello there, listeners. It's Susie New from the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, and thank you for listening to our podcast. This is an episode that was specially recorded for Podcasthon. For more than 1 week, more than 1,000 podcasters will highlight a charity of their choice. This podcast has also been released as a full video podcast. We are showing you everything. So I invite you to find us on the ASA YouTube channel if you'd like to see what we look like in our full podcasting glory. Today, I'm excited to bring you a crucial conversation about making surgery safer for every patient everywhere. In this episode, I'm chatting with Associate Professor Rob McDougall about Lifebox. Lifebox is a global non-profit dedicated to improving surgical and anaesthesia safety throughout the world through training and partnerships and what you might have heard of before through equipment such as oximeters and capnographs. It's about ensuring that when surgery happens, it goes ahead as safely as possible. Now, I have to admit a small conflict of interest, or maybe it's just an open declaration of my interest, as I am chair of Lifebox Australia and New Zealand. We at Lifebox ANZ are passionate about this mission, particularly on improving anaesthesia safety in our Asia-Pacific region. I also really want to extend a special thank you to everyone participating in Podcasthon for helping us raise awareness about Lifebox. Thank you for tuning in to learn more about how Lifebox is changing lives and how you can get involved with supporting this important cause. Thank you. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Pleasure, Susie. Great to see you.
Great to see you. I know we have so much that we could chat about, but today we're focusing on Lifebox.
Yes, exciting to chat about Lifebox.
Yeah, thanks for that. I want to start with just describing what Lifebox is.
So Lifebox is currently possibly the only NGO that is devoted to surgical and anaesthesia safety in the world. Now, there may be others, but Lifebox is still quite a small organisation, really. But it evolved from a project called the Global Oximetry Project, which was a project set up in the mid to late 2000s with the aim of providing pulse oximeters to operating theatres and anaesthetising locations that didn't have them. And it came around at the same time as the WHO Surgical Safety Checklist. And it was quite fortuitous that this checklist was introduced and studied, and it identified that the presence of an oximeter was a really important thing for patient safety. And the two projects emerged really into one, and out of that project came Lifebox. So a partnership between a number of organisations, North American and UK, but in particular the World Federation of Societies of Anaesthesiologists, the Association of Anaesthetists of Great Britain and Ireland, as it was, or as it is, and some academic organisations connected with Harvard University. So really an important bunch of partners got together with the aim of introducing oximetry to places that didn't have it, but also at the same time delivering and implementing the WHO Surgical Safety Checklist. And that was back in 2011 when Lifebox emerged.
You know, we have the checklist now. I think almost all of us take it for granted that we have the checklist in place, but I certainly remember the time when it was being introduced and being implemented. And it's hard to imagine that at that time, oximetry wasn't a feature in operating theatres around the world. That is something that's definitely been taken for granted in Australian anaesthesia practice since the 90s, 80s, a long, long time, right?
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, on the Australian version of the checklist, it's unusual to see a tick box for has an oximeter because we didn't need it because everywhere has an oximeter. But, you know, part of the work in identifying the need for oximeters was a great study that was published around the late 2000s, early 2010 or 11, which identified that there were 79,000 anaesthetising locations or operating theatres in low and middle income countries that didn't have oximeters, and that didn't take into account the recovery locations or the intensive care locations. So what we call the oximetry gap has always been considered to be about 79,000 based on this work that was done, but it was clearly greater than that.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine recovering a patient without oximetry. That just seems
you can't imagine
unfathomable, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both trained with oximeters. When I started my training, laryngeal mask masks and sonography were just becoming standards of care. But I don't remember a time without oximetry. And I think in Australia, there'd be very few currently practicing anaesthetists who would have anaesthetised without an oximeter.
Oh, yeah, we can't imagine it, can we? You mentioned oximetry, you mentioned the checklist. What else does Lifebox do?
So Lifebox, has evolved. So essentially, Lifebox has a number of ways of delivering surgical and anaesthesia safety or promoting it, and it's through educational activity mainly. There's the medtech side, which now is oximetry, capnography, and a surgical headlight. Associated with those devices, there's a strong educational component of teaching people how to use them and maintain them. But there are other activities. So one activity is a course that's called Clean Cut, that is multidisciplinary, and it's aimed at improving systems and reducing surgical site infections. Again, something that's linked to the surgical safety checklist. So we're all aware in the checklist that we give antibiotics when they're indicated, but there's a whole lot more to preventing surgical site infections. And Clean Cut goes in and looks at teams and how teams function, and looking at all aspects of preventing infection, from sterility, from counts, surgical counts, and of course antibiotics. And it's not just going in and delivering a course, it's setting up a program that embeds that educational program into the work environment. It's a fantastic course, and there are also Lifebox courses that are aimed at building teamwork and leadership, in particular for members of the nursing profession, which I think is, they're great initiatives. But again, they're very different from just introducing technology and training around technology. So Lifebox has certainly evolved, and these courses have been rolled out in very many sites. But in Australia and New Zealand, most of us identify Lifebox with the pulse oximeter up to now, but there are all these other programs that Lifebox is involved with.
Yeah, it's great to hear about all those programs. And again, it's hard to imagine going into an operating theatre where they don't count instruments, or they don't have ways of safeguarding sterility of those instruments. You've certainly seen them, I've certainly seen them. And you can imagine that actually introducing that change, it's not about introducing a new piece of technology. There's quite a lot of cultural change that needs to go with embedding that practice, that behavioural change.
Yeah, so the other thing that Lifebox does is, when introducing these programs, is measuring the impact of these changes. And that's done by a quality improvement approach, but it's also done with research. So there's been quite a body of work now that's been published looking at the effectiveness of the Clean Cut program, for instance, which is great. So we've been able to leverage off various volunteers and board members who have academic affiliations and journal affiliations and project and research skills. So whilst the organisation is not primarily a research organisation, Lifebox has produced quite a bit of research showing evidence for these interventions.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's what people need to know, the decision makers, isn't it, before they embark on these things, and clinicians on the ground as well. If you could encapsulate it, what do you think is the vision of Lifebox? What sort of world would Lifebox love to see?
So personally, the role of any NGO that's involved in education and development is to make themselves obsolete. So there's a big task there.
Yeah.
But, I just look at the success of the oximetry distribution. Now, we said that there were 79,000 places without an oximeter.
Yeah.
We're not exactly sure what the gap currently is, but it's been significantly closed. Now, Lifebox as an organisation has delivered and trained people in the use of 35,000 oximeters.
Wow, that's an incredible achievement.
But what we've seen in that time is the awareness of oximetry rising, and governments and other organisations have stepped in to fix the gap. So there's some work going on at the moment to measure the current gap, but we think that the gap is closing. It may well, in the foreseeable future, be closed, which is amazing. So that bit of Lifebox work may soon be not needed, hence Lifebox moving into other areas. So I think there's always going to be a role for an organisation to get involved in surgical and anaesthesia safety. The projects at the moment will keep Lifebox busy, and there will be new projects, but you need to be careful picking and choosing projects that are achievable.
That's true. The SMART goals.
Yeah.
I noticed that with the capnography, we're helping to distribute capnographs around the region in terms of what we're doing at Lifebox Australia and New Zealand. But I noticed a lot of advocacy work occurring at a higher level through the Lifebox Foundation, through the World Health Assembly, those sorts of things. So it's fantastic that there's awareness being raised about the benefits of capnography in terms of patient safety during anaesthesia.
Yeah, well, capnography is a trickier task than oximetry. So, if you try to explain the role of capnography to someone who is a non-anaesthesiologist, it's actually pretty tough. An oximeter is easy. You get an oximeter, you put it on someone's finger and say, this is the machine that measures the amount of oxygen in your body. Even to a layperson, it's quite easy to understand why that might be important. But trying to explain to people about the importance of capnography, which you and I know is so useful, not just in detecting that the airway is in the right spot, but it tells all sorts of things. It's even a surrogate cardiac output monitor as well as a respiratory monitor.
Yeah.
It's really tough, and capnography has always been put in the too hard basket. So it's been a great achievement to get this far and actually have a device to actually roll out. And there are a lot of challenges with that. And Susie, you actually have more on-the-ground experience with the rollout of this project, given your work in Cambodia. So you are a pioneer.
Thanks for the plug there, Rob. But still, it is a difficult challenge. I totally agree. And I'm really glad that Lifebox is taking it on, not just from the technical aspect, but the advocacy side as well.
And look, the educational aspects of this project are huge. So I was fortunate enough to be involved in the development of the education package, and the listeners might be interested to hear about some of the challenges we had. My job was to chair a group looking at the physiology of carbon dioxide, and everyone on that group was an anaesthetist or anaesthesia provider, anaesthesiologist, and everybody raced in with saying, how are we going to teach the Bohr effect and the Haldane effect? And we had to pull it right back.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going to go there with some of our anaesthesia providers in low and middle income countries, no.
That was really challenging but interesting. How do you sell capnography to the world? And I think how do you teach the physiology of carbon dioxide showed it's actually going to be quite tough, particularly to convince donors that they need to give to this project.
Yeah, well, and that's why we're doing this podcast. So thanks again for coming on and giving a plug to Lifebox. I wanted to focus a little bit on you, if I can now. So you're on the board of Lifebox?
Yeah, well, I'm on the board of Lifebox UK. So the Lifebox Global Governance Council is the combination of two boards, US board and the UK board. So Lifebox is a combination of two charities, one based in the UK and one based in the US.
Lovely. How long have you been on the board? How did you get involved with Lifebox?
Well, going back to the start, I became involved with Lifebox as a volunteer. My professional work in low and middle income countries started through an organisation called Primary Trauma Care Foundation, or before it was a foundation, Primary Trauma Care, which remains a trauma education program, so management of injury victims in low and middle income countries. That course has been rolled out in over 100 countries throughout the world. It's sustained in quite a few countries, and that was in the late 90s. And through that educational experience, I became involved in the World Federation of Societies of Anaesthesiologists and had a long association in official roles there, which I no longer have. But out of that came the opportunity to develop some educational materials for the Global Oximetry Project, which became Lifebox. So I've been a volunteer since 2011, and I then helped establish the local Lifebox ANZ committee and then chaired it, of which you are chair now, Susie, and I've been on the governing council since 2021.
It's such a long and impressive history, and you are a great inspiration to many people. As you said, you've been involved with Primary Trauma Care, the World Federation. You chaired the ASA's Overseas Development Education Committee for a long while there. What motivated you, or what inspires you to be involved in global health?
That's a really interesting question, because I was actually encouraged to get involved by Kester Brown, who was a pretty inspirational, incredibly inspirational character. And it was mainly through an interest in education that I think he recommended that I got involved in primary trauma care. Essentially when Kester asked you to do something, you generally said yes. And well, you meet all these incredible people. And I guess meeting people like Kaini Agiamir, who's the senior anaesthetist for many years in the Solomon Islands. Here is someone who left his village to go to secondary school at a time when most people didn't go to secondary school. We had to move islands in the Solomon Islands. And then he went to university in PNG and did medicine, and then did specialist training, and then came back to Honiara in the Solomon Islands, where he's the only anaesthetist for many years. He speaks about 6 languages. Really, really smart person and really capable. And you meet people like that and you say, actually, these are great people to get to know, and there must be a way of helping people. I mean, I'm just in awe of people like Kaini.
Absolutely.
And there are many of them. So, it's been a lot of fun. They've been interesting projects. I think everyone who gets involved in global health sees it as a whole lot of teamwork, and it's great fun working with a team. Yes, I've had these roles, but I've only been able to do these roles because there have been all these other people volunteering and probably covering for me in my real job as well.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you to our colleagues in our home departments. Yes.
So, you look at some of the people involved in projects and the time they dedicate to them. It makes it easy being the chair of a committee when you've got people running these fantastic projects. And if my job's to go out and get support or help publicise them, then that's my job. It's good fun, and it's actually not that demanding if you're organised.
Very gracious, very generous answer. Thanks for those insights. As we're wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to say about Lifebox, about global health, about your involvement?
I'd better give a plug for Lifebox. So there's been some changes with the way that people can get involved in Lifebox, and the capnography project is a big project, and we're not quite sure of the scope of it yet, but really, if anyone would like to support that project, a combined capnograph oximetry unit, the Lifebox Smile Train capno oximeter, can be placed in a deserving operating theatre for $1,000. Okay, so that comes with an education program, comes with a warranty. And now our college, so ANZCA, is now looking after the donation portal, and it's easy to access through the ANZCA website. Lifebox ANZ oversees the projects in our region to do with Lifebox, and Lifebox ANZ is a partnership between the college, but really importantly between the New Zealand Society of Anaesthetists and, of course, the Australian Society of Anaesthetists. So they're 3 professional bodies working very hard and productively to promote Lifebox. Susie is the chair of Lifebox ANZ. I attend the meetings, but there's an active committee, and there's plans to get capnos out in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Currently, we have Cambodia where they've been placed, and PNG where they're about to be placed, and there are going to be other opportunities as well. So I encourage people to go to the college website, find the Lifebox ANZ page, and find out more about what's happening with Lifebox. And if you're able to donate and support the placement of a capnographer in a low middle income country, then that's fantastic.
Fantastic. A great plug. And of course, I will put a link to that website in the show notes. So it's right there so people can just click the link, jump on in, and hopefully donate to this very, very worthy cause. Look, thanks, Rob. Thanks, as always, for giving up your time. I know you're very busy and you've always been so generous with everything when it comes to global health, and definitely supporting me in other ways as well. So thank you once again.
Great pleasure, Susie, and look forward to chatting soon.
Thank you for joining us on this special episode of the Australian Anaesthesia podcast, which has been recorded as part of Podcasthon. I hope you've been inspired by Rob's insights into Lifebox and the critical work that we do to improve surgical safety around the world. As the chair of Lifebox Australia and New Zealand, I'm really grateful for your interest and support. If you're moved to help make surgery safer for patients in our region, please consider donating to Lifebox. Every contribution counts. Can you imagine giving an anaesthetic without an oximeter or capnography? Well, it's happening every day in our region. So let's work together to change this. You can donate by visiting the ANZCA Foundation page and selecting Lifebox. Of course, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Thank you again for listening, and I look forward to bringing you more important conversations through the Australian Anaesthesia podcast in the future. And of course, as always, I hope you're staying safe and well out there.
This has been Australian Anaesthesia, produced by the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, with many thanks to host and editor Dr. Susie New, with music by Soda Lime Music, sound and engineering by Bearview, and graphics by the ASA Communications team. For more content, please visit www.asa.org.au.